Welcome to Scene, where the art world meets the real world. Every 2 weeks, we sit down with emerging and established artists to offer a genuine glimpse into their lives and minds, all in an authentic and totally straightforward manner. I'm Carrie Scott, your host. And with 2 decades of experience as a curator and art historian, I firmly believe in the transformative power of art, if it's seen. Today's guest on Behind the Scene, our series where we talk to the people that actually make the art world work, is framer Tim Blake. And I hesitate saying the word framer because Tim is actually so much more than just a framer. And he's been part of this world for 25 years. First at John Jones, and then at Derbyshire, and now he's going out on his own. So I'm kind of hoping he's going to sit down with us and give us all the tea, all the stuff, because he's not affiliated with those giants anymore. But most importantly, I'm kind of interested in talking to him about what it is to be a framer, because his job is so much bigger than most people can possibly appreciate. Hi, Tim Blake.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited. Yeah.
Are you excited?
Yeah.
How did you get into this mess?
Oh. University in textiles, printed textiles, needed a job, North London, Crouch End, got a job at the Conran shop on the stationery counter. Then I started to sell lights for the Conran shop. Then I got a job with the Holt & Getty Picture Gallery, which is just up the road in Jubilee Place, worked with Michael Hoppen. And then got really into photographs. And having been there for a couple of years, I became really close friends with the picture framers, John Jones, Matt Jones, the whole family. And just by chance, about 15 years later, I look back and think, well, that was probably the most amazing experience as a picture framer.
So you were with John Jones for 15 years?
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Yeah. But it was amazing. I mean, I think I hadn't even anticipated who I'd be working with. And I think as you get more confident as a picture framer with the art and the people, it just becomes, I don't know, it's really fascinating area, picture framing, because you don't expect to meet who you're going to meet.
Who did you meet?
I didn't think I was going to do that.
None of that.
Well, I think the funny story that gets me, when I was at the Conran shop, I remember the first person I ever really kind of saw that really got me starstruck was Ringo. And he was tapping on the stationery counter. And I'm a drummer, a bad drummer. And I remember tapping him on the shoulder. And he just turned around and said, you just want to touch my arm, do you? And I froze. And I think ever since then, I thought, right, that's not how you deal with celebrity people. You become nice to them and work with them. And so that was the biggest shock. And then met George Harrison, Ray Cooper, all these amazing people. And I think being so deep into the art world, or being someone that advises in the art world, you realise that creative people have huge creative interests. They buy art, they get given art, and they really want to work with someone who's also quite into it. You can't not be into it.
I've met many a framer who's not as into it as you are.
Framers don't meet framers.
Frames don't make
Framers don't meet framers. That's what I'm going to change.
Huh.
So I think when you work within the framing industry is massive, but picture framers within their own walls that they work in, they really don't do much other than work inward, because they're so into what they do. But I think there are links to make with other picture framers to share advice. I mean, I remember when at John Jones, there was a time where everything was done to a really good standard, but actually that standard wasn't the standard. It was only meeting with someone like Jane McCausland, the conservator. She said, you guys really need to be doing something exceptionally different, because you have a duty to preserve and protect. And then all of a sudden, overnight, the business changed. We realised that that's an area. That's the area to preserve your collections and all that sort of stuff. Helping artists with a bit of direction as to what materials would be better for them to use early on so their artwork doesn't corrode and all that sort of stuff. And then years later, working with Derbyshire for 10 years, it's a very similar thing. The model is, what is the best thing to do for the artwork that looks great in your house or your collection or your show? Not being the loudest person in the room in terms of what...
Like the mandate.
yeah, I'm looking at this. I remember framing this. Everything just flows. It's not like, look at the frame. But there are situations and scenarios where the frame needs to really start to say, you know, I'm making a noise here. And you think 25 years later, I'm so much more confident with what I'm prepared to suggest for something.
What do you think's the most challenging thing you've ever framed?
Yeah, the most challenging piece I've ever framed would be a piece of bread by Richard Hamilton. I think it's a piece from the late 60s. It's for a private client.
An actual piece of bread?
Yeah, it's a piece of work. So it's a piece of bread, like a loaf in a bag. And with the greatest level of sort of respect of trying to get the best level of integrity for this piece is not to change the form of it, but actually it needed to also be preserved. So you're thinking the frame is one thing, but it's nothing about the frame. This is about what I need to do to help preserve that artwork. And at the time, it was like, well, I don't really know what to do. So that's when you pick up the phone and speak to the conservators who do know what to do. And then you realise, well, there's a bigger world out there that we know nothing about. So you bring all these people in, you learn from them, and then you become a better organisation, I suppose. So I think what they did is they did something to balance the humidity or something in the bag of bread. And then we just cleaned up the frame, changed the glazing, made sure all the backing was archival and the rest of it. And to look at, nothing changed apart from the level of reflection. The frame kept its scratches and all that sort of stuff.
Because it's topical, though I have no idea when we're actually going to air this. What if someone brought the comedian to you, Maurizio Catalan's banana? Obviously, the banana.
one that doesn't actually exist. Well,
If you had to make like a case for it. Best answer ever.
No, why? I wouldn't. I remember years ago, there was a really amazing American woman came in. She was carrying shopping bags and she came in and she was talking about having some bits and pieces framed. Really good dialogue with her. She was fascinating. And then she had something in her bag that she was kind of rummaging around with. And it was a piece, like a little rectangular log with loads of kind of Jesus nails banged into it. And in it, in the nails was this little sphere, this little orb of kind of concrete, like a ball. I was intrigued by that. And she said, oh, maybe we can frame this. Like put it on a base with a cover over it. So what is it? And she said, oh, this was by my old boyfriend, Bobby Rauschenberg, right? My hero, probably the best one. Yeah, I'd say, on all levels. And at that point, I thought, okay, the best level of respect I can give this is to tell her to take it home and put it on a coffee table and just live with it. Because I don't think although it's a museum piece, I don't think she needed to make it a museum piece. What was really exciting to me is that kind of whole thing where Bobby gave it to me. Whereas Bobby didn't give it to me. If it was mine, I'd probably be a bit more sort of more curious and protect it in a way. But because it was hers, I thought, no, take it home, live with it. You've probably got loads of amazing things like that.
Yeah, live with it the way.
Duty of care, isn't it? So
yeah.
my role is to preserve and protect, but also not create a stage for something when it doesn't necessarily need it. You know?
You're stealing all my questions. I was going to say, what do you think?
Told you a ramble.
What's the job of a framer? We don't even need to go there. I was also going to ask you if you ever framed anything you hated, like absolutely hated. But I imagine you'd probably just be like,
Think about that a lot, actually.
do you?
Yeah. So it wouldn't be an opening line, but I think I have a duty to create a form of trust and create a language with a client that they believe in me and I believe in them. I think I'll challenge an idea so much. I'll challenge an idea that they have if I don't think it's right, but I wouldn't challenge the artwork. And it's weird. Okay, you might go into a gallery and think, oh, whatever. Soon as you're provided with a narrative, it's amazing how you can start to really love something, right? So someone can come in with an artwork that I think, oh, meh. But as soon as I understand that there's a story behind it, my mum gave me, whatever, you can start to fall in love with stuff.
You made me, I have a Nick Knight over there in the corner that we framed before we ever lived in this house, before we ever owned a house, right? I was gifted that amazing work.
The polished aluminium one?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And you said, put it in polished aluminium, and I was like, no, that seems like a mistake.
No, it's right.
It's so right. I mean, 10, 15 years, 13, must be 13 years because it was when we got married. It was so right. But you are very good at pushing the, actually, I think you could...
It's really easy though. There's a leading thing with that. So for example, I look at that and I do think Richard Hamilton. So Ben Nicholson, David Hockney, Richard Hamilton, Andy Warhol, all those names that we all know, right? Most framers, I understand, most framers would know kind of what that would have been framed in at the time it was made. So I'm led by, I can't really comment on that because I think that was framed to be part of the work. This isn't, I kind of did a nod to late 60s, and that frame design was never really changed from 60s, 70s and 80s. That's a Hamilton kind of thing. And I know their work seemed to kind of sit well in that groove, and you'd never need to change it.
No, never. But it's interesting in terms of your process, where you said the client has to trust you, you have to trust the client. That was after you and I had sort of done a few things together, and you were like, can I suggest something a bit crazy here? And I was like,
so many times
sure.
I've said to clients, you know, even working for both framers, Derbyshire and John Jones, if you don't like it, we'll do it again. We say that and we mean it. I've never had to do anything again. I may have to maybe change the glazing because someone thinks, oh, I should have gone with the super duper stuff because it looks too shiny, but never in the concepts.
do you prefer working with the artist or the collector? Or the like industry person, the dealer, the curator, who's the ideal client?
It's funny when you say the artist, because the artist isn't one thing. The artist is on a massive spectrum of where the artist is in their career. So I remember there was an artist, no names mentioned, came in, oh blimey, I've got to be careful not to mention the name, came in and I said, so yeah, what would you like? She goes, I hate frames. That was a challenge. Okay, well, I'm going to act as the role of the collector. So someone has a duty to preserve what they've not so much maybe invested in, but they've bought because they love. But you don't want to just leave it there. You want to protect it, from dust and whatever. I'm so tempted to say her name. Anyway, we made a couple of frames. It was different colorways, and she absolutely loved them. Didn't have much to do with. I think that project was just a kind of one-off. Then several years later, I'll go to Paris Photo as a hint, or Photo London, and I will see these colourful frames all the time. Now I'm like in the background thinking, that was a challenge, but she must have loved them so much. She's been maintaining that style of framing through her career. No one's going to know that. I know. I really love that. That's really exciting.
So the answer is the artist.
No, that's not the answer. I really love working with collectors because I think they're the ones that really kind of engage, and they have an interest to really understand the processes, the material use. They really do, because there's a money thing attached to it. There's an investment side of it. Whereas I think a framer also has a massive responsibility not to say to an artist, don't do that. You wouldn't have said to Joseph Boys, don't use cardboard. You can't say that. But today's a different place from when they were making art. So I think the key thing would be a picture framer has an opportunity to either go to a school, a sixth form, a foundation course, a degree, whatever, and speak to the experts who are teaching these kids about what's really important. What is longevity? Because if you really want to make something that's going to last, you really need to be kind of thoughtful about those things.
Well, and I mean, not to use an example that's in the room, but you did do this with a work of mine. I had bought a Rodney Graham in grad school.
Yeah.
And had it framed by good framers. Again, mentioning no names, but out in Seattle. Had it here. And you said, I think the color's going.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? And you were like, I think that there's an oxidation thing. I don't know what it is, but I've got to take it apart. And you literally walked out with it because I sent you a picture.
Yeah.
And so, but how do you gain that knowledge, right? I'm supposed to be the expert here. And I had no idea it was happening.
Being tuned into stuff. When a framer goes to an exhibition, don't you? All they're doing is looking at the corners, mostly criticising how bad the joins are unless it's their own frame. But you're kind of tuned into this thing. That when I walk in, the first thing I kind of identify with, oh, you should change the glazing, all that sort of stuff. But material use.
You're not saying that about here.
No. I went to an art fair last night and I saw some really lovely examples of...
The Woolrich?
Yeah.
Did you go to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I went. So I saw some examples of I understand why the artist has put that print in that frame, because it's all about affordability. This is my frustration. That framer who made that frame for, let's say, 60 quid could have used archival materials for exactly the same amount of money, but they don't know. So it's up to people like me and my peers to kind of, remember I started earlier talking to you about the knowledge is inside. There's no harm with sharing that knowledge, because all you're doing is protecting the interests of the people that are paying you to make it in the first place.
It's the whole point of Scene, man. It's the whole point of Scene.
Yeah.
The irony, though, is that I love that you're sat, I mean, most of the work in here you have framed.
Yeah, there's loads of stuff.
But you're sat in front of two things that you had nothing to do with.
That's ace.
It's as if I did it intentionally.
Yeah.
But I would say, so the frame behind you, that is a New York-based artist, that one, I would have never done that unless I had collaborated with you for as long as I had, because I took it to the framer and said, oi, I think we should do a slant. And they were like, you're insane.
No.
And I was feeling quite poor, so I didn't call you because you're very expensive. And so I went with
Delete that.
We'll delete that. Well, no, but you know, Derbyshire and John Jones are the tippy top of the game.
There's a quote I need to read out about that, about the expensive, how to balance expensive with non-expensive and why.
Well, it's
I'll
really,
find it in a bit.
but it is really hard. And it is worth talking about the fact that, right, those framers who we are no longer with, they are prohibitively expensive sometimes. But going back to the collaboration piece, like you and I have been in conversation for so long that I had the guts to take it to somewhere a little bit less established.
It's absolutely perfect.
It is perfect. And those guys have learned from my collaboration with you, right? Like I talked them through how I wanted this to look. And
It's glazing, right? As
the
well.
glazing is right. That's definitely...
The thing is, so this one, if that was framed as a full rectangle, that negative space, top right corner, would have just ruined the...
Yeah.
It would have shifted the eye to that corner.
Yeah.
And maybe 2 years into the job of picture framing John Jones, I wouldn't have known that. You have to sort of make that mistake to realise, but it actually looks great on this wall. The thing is, when I'm in the studio, which is always typically studio-based stuff unless I do the site visits, the chances are I'm not going to know where this is going. So it happens to be really, really... It's fallen nicely that it happens to be pointing into this corner of the wall. But that's why I spend more time... A bit kind of Kentridgey, actually, isn't it? I spend more time asking those questions, really. So framers shouldn't be interior designers, but they should really work really hard to understand how that mapping out of space works. I think.
Because you also do conceive entire shows,
Yeah.
right? I
Well,
mean,
there's one I'm thinking of. Did we no, that porcelain wasn't, we didn't conceive it, but
that was my idea.
that was breaking rules big time.
Well, so let's talk about that, right? Because that is a real example of, I think, the genius of you. I phoned John Pawson because he sent me a book, Spectrum, and I kept flipping through it. I get a lot of books. I have a lot of books. I couldn't put the stupid book down. And I said to him, it's almost like we should launch an exhibition where you see it in the round, where you see all of them. And I thought John, who I didn't know that well at the time, would laugh at me. And he was like, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. It's quite an abstract
And
way.
I thought, okay, but now how am I going to do this? So my next phone call was to you. And I was like, exactly. I was like, what if we launched an exhibition with 320 photos and we somehow show them in the round? You were like, okay. And again, I was like, shit, someone needs to say no to me. But that wasn't what happened.
That couldn't have come at a better time, because that's where, I'd started at Derbyshire then. And I would say hands down the best solution finding fabricator that there is. Out the box thinking. I mean, so the solutions for that project was completely about team. I couldn't honestly have come up with that. That was about working with, Mark and Dan and the crew who have got over hundreds of years worth of experience, saying, let's smash the walls down a little bit and do something that it's almost like, let's forget about cost. What's the best way to realise the vision? And then you build it that way rather than what can't you do? I think the complicated thing was what happens after the show and how does it get put up again? And we came up with that as well. Everything's in boxes and it's all ready to go.
boxes, and then you had frames for installations
Yeah.
so that we could put them there and suspend them because they were
Yeah.
hung from wires. And you worked really closely with John's entire team. I mean, Nicholas,
Nick and
Barba,
Max.
I mean, Max, right? Those guys,
Still work
you
with them.
came up with the best rigging system.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely no space for any error in that.
and it was
That can be really challenging for a frame when you work with materials that are natural. But actually, I think we spent so much time researching the kind of tint that we wanted to do on the word. John liked it, Nick liked it, Matt liked it. We all liked it, and it worked, and we kept to the deal.
Do you think anyone misunderstands your role as a framer?
Me personally, as a framer, or the framer?
The framer.
Yeah, I think the framer is such a. It's too blunt a word. I mean, I was walking there thinking today. So the framing. A framer is part of a process. Framing, and within framing, are lots of different processes. What I'm really interested in is not being known as the framer, because there's so many things I know and like anyway. I like this. I like the fact that we have a language and a relationship. The framing is part of it, and then it's done, and then we can come back and still talk about it while we're having a coffee. So you can look at the granular side of framing. That we are at a workspace and we're looking at the mounts and the glazing. That's fabulous. It's fantastic. And I can really neek out on that. I can really nerd out. But then I know we're probably going to do it again sometime. And that's it. When you see that the client doesn't come back to you, then I don't know. That doesn't often happen.
Definitely
I
not.
suppose. It's a relationship thing. It's all on trust, integrity, chancing stuff, actually. I like being a bit ballsy about it.
What's the most extravagant request you've ever had? Or like nuts request? I mean, mine probably.
That's a really good question. If you asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have said something. But now, actually, there's so many formulas and solutions that have been made in such a small amount of time. For example, Richter painting, 4 meters long by 2 meters high. There was a time when you wouldn't be able to glaze it unless you use sort of 8mm acrylic. But there are really viable, amazing solutions where special fabricators can actually piece the top-end glazing materials together to create one huge piece of glazing. I imagine in 3 or 4 years' time, it'll be seamless, but at the moment you can get these tiny hairlines, which is, I think, acceptable for what it's for. It's progress, isn't it? I think in such a short amount of time, framers are being taken more seriously by suppliers because they have demands that suppliers need to actually stick to, because the art world is a really strong thing. Art needs to be presented in a certain way.
And without proper framing, none of this gets preserved. You know, that's something that I sometimes struggle with clients, you know, justifying the cost of something. When you're like, you've spent 20 grand on the thing, spend another 2 on good framing, so that it's not going to fall apart.
Or spend 800 quid in it and it will look like you won't want to look at it again.
Right.
And you might need to make another frame again.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's sometimes I'll have the conversation. I'm like, oof, I feel like I'm slightly upselling here, but come on.
It's really important.
Trust me. And so now I show them my Rodney Graham before and after. Because, I mean, literally, if you compare it.
Powerful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you compare that Rodney Graham to other Rodney Grahams, it's purple. It's not supposed to be purple. It's supposed to be a black and white photograph, but it oxidized. Right? It oxidized?
Yeah.
Did something to it?
It oxidized. Most people wouldn't know, but we know.
We know. Have you ever framed something that was fake? Have you ever framed a fake? Or that you thought was a fake?
So the proper answer to that is I wouldn't know.
You would know.
Yeah, of course.
So have you?
Yeah, loads of times.
Have you?
Yeah.
Oh no.
But what does fake mean?
Not sanctioned from the artist studio.
What if the artist isn't alive?
Yeah, fake.
Okay. I reckon most framers who framed prints by Salvador Dali, most of those aren't legit.
Really?
Yeah. Probably the most, well, I'll put my neck out here, but probably the most faked lithographic prints that you'll ever get on the planet.
I mean, that's intel.
Yeah,
That's
I think
such
so.
good intel.
Again, duty of care. If you have any suspicion that something's not right, then you can inform your client and you can either freak them out or they can pursue it a little bit further down the line. Thing is, the framer should really, limited amount of questions because you're there to service the client, right, and to make and to preserve and protect the artwork. You shouldn't really be asking too many questions about where stuff's from. In fact, you shouldn't.
It's none of your business. You don't need to know.
You've not asked me what the weirdest thing I've ever framed is.
I'm about to. But I would have thought it was a piece of bread.
No.
What is the weirdest thing?
Oh, this is quite shocking.
Uh-oh.
We had an idea something was coming in, opened up the crate.
What do you mean you had an
Don't
idea?
smile, it's not nice.
But what do you mean you had an idea?
Because I'll give it away. We basically had these 2 watercolours by Hitler. And it was probably the weirdest.
What?
Yeah, already.
Yeah, me too.
The weirdest thing, because they were exquisite, but something really, really, I mean, that's
Okay,
probably
describe them. What did they look like?
small watercolours, crafted beautifully. One was a landscape, one was, I think, of an old residence in Germany or something like this. Signed by him.
Oh my God.
I don't know at what point he'd made them, but the fact I touched them was a bit weird. But, okay, sensation, shocker than you.
Yeah.
That had more impact than that show, and that was a show that really stuck with me, and having to work with the artists that were at Shocker Than You.
But touching something that Hitler
Yeah, there
made.
you go. Yeah. Then you think, who's putting that on their wall? But then you think, well, actually, if it was in a museum, it'd be acceptable, right?
No.
Well, if it's a museum, why not?
Because he was like because.
Yeah. Shut the door and lock it up.
Shut the door.
Or educate.
Educate, sure.
Don McCullin.
I love Don.
Not in the same breath with Don.
I mean, Don McCullin.
So Don McCullin is way up there on my hero level. I've worked with Don for years.
I mean, like, I don't even think I could speak if I met him.
You mustn't merge these 2 conversations. I've got to find a way of editing this one. But the whole thing of the shocking, it's not appeal, it's shock. As a picture framer, that was a weird position to be in. But I've worked with Don for years, and he is an educator. You can just fall into his spell and listen to that man. But he has taken the most brutal images that are real, that are a result of war, but they're put on a wall, and they're there to educate and teach. So I don't know. I think there's some really, really weird stuff that I don't know. Who are we to say something shouldn't be seen?
Well,
And I framed them, and the guy. So we had to speak to the team who were framing them to ask whether they're happy to frame it. And happy's not the right word, but yeah, they were framed in the end. Yeah.
That's really complicated. I mean, that's like beyond.
At what point do you say no?
Complicated. I don't know.
There was a client years ago who used to. Oh, I don't know. I shouldn't go down this route. There was a client who would get used arms, Uzi 9mm, unused grenades that have been repurposed, Glocks, and they would go to a specialist company who would acid them, whatever, and they became gilded. Obviously, these exquisite gilded objects. And we put those on plinths in these amazing vitrines for a collector years ago. Yeah, weird.
That's hard too.
Yeah, but it's not a secret. That's what he collected.
I mean, it begs a bunch of questions. Like, what is art? How do we define art? Is a banana and duct tape
Well, back to that question.
art?
If you own that piece of work, what would you do with it? You'd stick it on the wall, surely. But you're never going to own the work because it was never made to be owned.
Well, it was meant to be a comment on how the
but it wasn't.
commodification of the art world.
It's just a dialogue.
It sold last night for 6-point-something million.
And it will sell again.
Yeah, it will. And the guy that bought it has said he's going to eat it tomorrow. Great.
And replace it with another one.
Uh-huh. And another bit of duct tape. Because every time you put it up, I think you're supposed to do all that. Art's weird, right? Like, I agree with you. Who are we to, ultimately, I think who are we to say what is art and what isn't art? If you want
Good to talk about.
If you want to put it on your wall, you can put it on your wall.
One of the most memorable pieces of work I remember is when I think I'd left school, I went to the Liverpool Tate and saw Oak Tree, which is Michael Craig Martin's little, and it was high up and it was lit. Probably my first experience with conceptual art, I got it straight away. Now, if someone brought that to me, my role is to say, absolutely do not touch it. Put it where it's meant to be. taught yourself out of a job, whatever. I think it's really important.
It is important. I didn't imagine, which is really naive, I didn't imagine kind of ethics coming to play in what you do, right? But it obviously, it does massively.
Yeah.
You know, and part of me was just thinking like, well, with those Hitler watercolors, maybe you could have put non-archival stuff.
It's not my role to destroy stuff.
No, I know, I realize that. But right, my little brain was like,
Yeah.
I think I would really struggle.
I do think about them quite a bit because it had a weird effect on me.
I'm sure.
You think about everything. You think about your clients and their families, and yeah, not to make a laugh of it. It was real, you know.
Yeah, but the legacy, right? You can't make too fun of a point of it, but you, honestly, like none of the work that's in this house that charts a 20-year career, you know, if it's not in a frame, it wouldn't exist anymore. So framing is this really integral.
Well, no.
Not the Eric Yanker, but that's a sculpture, right?
Yeah.
And you can't. Though so many people have told me to frame it, and I'm like, I can't.
It's a sculpture because you made it a sculpture.
No, he made it a sculpture.
Yeah, therefore it's a sculpture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Can't mess with that.
But then you frame sculptures. Do it all the time.
I know. It's wild, right?
Yeah.
That's why I said, like, how'd you get yourself into this mess? Because really, gosh,
I had no idea what framers were. Even at university, I'd never been into a frame shop. It's weird. I think after all these years, you realise that you do play quite an important part, I think.
I mean, giant. Okay, so what now? You're no longer with John Jones. You're not with Derbyshire. You are out in the wild on your own, which I think is incredibly exciting for us, like the art world. But what on earth are you actually doing? Are you going to be a framer?
I'm on my own, but I'm not. So what I really want to do is piece together the best makers of things that I mean, I've worked with the best makers since I've been at John Jones through Derbyshire. Metal fabricators, conservators, that are really important. And they're all brilliant, but I think I'm lucky because I have relationships with so many of them. So fabricators, makers of all things, picture framers, all of which have a level of care that is there with mine. We all share it. I mean, we know who we are, I think. And the point of what I want to do is to continue to work with the clients I've worked with, some for 25 years, some for 2, some for whatever, is to continue their collecting journey and their preservation journey by choosing me to point the project to the right person. There are opportunities, I think, that artists may have missed because they probably haven't approached a framer because maybe they're too high profile. I realise that no framers are high profile. It's that everyone can work together. That's with artists. The collector thing for me is really interesting because I think that's something that I kind of really geared up to really put some enthusiasm into. Because I know that there's so many collections out there that need some TLC and I can see stuff disappearing. Artists, absolutely love working with artists, but that's such a broad scope. Linking people together, right? I think 25 years has created a really strong pool of people that I like to work with and they like to work with me, and something will grow out of that.
I think that's true.
How's that for a business plan?
It's exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
No, I mean, right, like, not being flippant, but you are so much more than just a framer, right? So it kind of makes sense to me that you would evolve into doing something that is a bit more collaborative, is a bit more involved, dare I say.
Yeah.
I mean, the number of times that I have picked up the phone and been like, hey, Tim, I've got a problem.
Yeah.
Can you help me think this through? Right, that's being able to offer that to other people is giant.
Well, I think maybe it's the role of the art consultant, which never really used to be a big thing, but it's a big thing now. Maybe the role of the art consultant has kind of planted a seed in my head that I don't sell art, far from selling art, but I work with all the people that do, and I work with all the people that buy it. So I think creating this kind of fluid link between them, that there's some groundwork to be done there, but it can work really well. Be the first to do it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Just chart your own new
Single
terrain.
projects.
Tim Blake Projects.
Yeah.
Tim Blake Projects. Thank you for doing this. I know that it's, I don't know, it's something, but it's really good.
Ace. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Thank you, mate.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Scene podcast. If you liked what you heard, I'd love it if you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to connect with us between episodes, follow us on Instagram at @seen.art. I'm Carrie Scott, and I'll see you next time. Get it?